Today, the final episode of the Connor McDavid roster building challenge. Today, goaltending.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Wednesday edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. I want to thank everyone that is making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we've got your team covered every day. And today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, and football season is right around the corner. Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your futures bet for Futures Day now. On today's edition of Locked On Oilers, we are going to conclude the Connor McDavid era roster builder challenge, talking about the goaltending position group. Yesterday's show, we did defense. Monday, we did the forwards. So if you want to get an idea of the full roster in its scope, you got to check out all three episodes. So on today's show, we are going to start by talking about why goaltending is so hard, why the Oilers cannot seem to get it right for more than 15 years now. In our second segment, we will talk about our starting goalie on this fantasy team. And then our final segment, we will talk about our backup goalie and an overarching conversation about what the quality of goalie you need to have if you would like to win the Stanley Cup is. So let's start with the numbers game here. Let's start with the very obvious and the very straightforward. There are only 64 NHL goalies at a given time. Yes, I know some teams carry 3, but for the most part, we are talking about the most specialized skill set of hockey players anywhere. I think you can point to the struggles Hockey Canada is having, finding you can't call it a franchise goalie for international play, but finding a starter they feel good about. And look, Jordan Binnington is an adequate NHL starter. I would even venture to say he's an above average NHL starter. But beyond him, Aiden Hill, Sam Montembaugh, nobody really jumping off the screen as far as dominant in the same respect you would say about Connor Hellebuyck, perhaps an Igor Shesterkin, and Andrei Vasilevsky, etc. This is the hardest position group in the NHL to get right because of the numbers game. That is why, and as I have discussed all summer long, and the everydayers have heard me say, part of the reason the Oilers are so skittish to try and improve on Calvin Pickard and Stuart Skinner is how hard it is to make even the most incremental of improvements amongst this position group. You think that going from a low-tier backup to a mid-tier backup or maybe even a quality backup should give you an improvement in performance, but so much of goaltending is environmental factors compounding together and how it creates whatever necessarily might drive the outcome. And realistically, if the entire country of Canada, which is still the world's supreme hockey power, cannot produce 3 goalies it feels great about for international play, I think that puts in context how challenging it is to get a starting goalie you feel good about. Last week on our episode where we talked about big Oiler mistakes of recent history, we talked about the Darnell Nurse extension and the Jack Campbell free agency signing. One of the real keys and one of the trend lines I find interesting and I think is relevant to this conversation is the simple matter of the fact that last year, 2024-2025 in the NHL, 17 team starters were drafted by that team. 17, more than half of the league starters last year were drafted by the team that played them. And this gets to one of my long-held organizational philosophies. I think you should be drafting a goalie every single year, regardless of how you feel about your position at the NHL level. Draft a guy, stash him in Europe. Draft a guy, stash him in Major Junior. Draft a guy, put him in the AHL. You can never have enough goalie depth. You need to be looking at goalies as effectively lottery tickets because there is so much about the position that we cannot evaluate yet. We don't have the data. We don't have the positioning. We don't have the tracking. But we have a baseline understanding of what does matter and where the cutoff is for effective goaltending. And look, we can point to some of these changes of scenery, Freddie Anderson in Carolina from Toronto. You can point to Ryan Miller going to St. Louis from Buffalo. Sometimes the good to great goalie changing venues doesn't help them, like in the case of Ryan Miller, who struggled when the Blues acquired him to try and go all in that year to win the Stanley Cup. I think it is so hard to turn a goalie's results in one location to another into something. It is so difficult to make a goalie's performance stick from venue to venue. You know, I thought landing Jacob Markstrom for the Devils last year was a coup. The year before, the Devils went through like 7 different starting goalies, none of which were particularly good. And ultimately, they opted for Markstrom, who was older and more expensive, but had a significant track record of approval. I think another factor at play here, goalies are hard to bring along when you're trying to win. And I don't think it's a coincidence you saw teams like Tampa Bay do this with Vasilevsky and Ben Bishop. The Rangers do this with Shesterkin and Hank. The Bruins doing this with Ullmark and Rask. Not Ullmark. Yeah, excuse me, not Ullmark and Rask. Ullmark and Swayman, where you put a quality young goalie that you feel good about into a backup role, and you gradually bring them along until you feel like they are ready to make the leap into being a starter. And that's part of why drafting these guys is so important. First of all, and second, frankly, like 15th of all, I know I've used that segue quite a few times. When you get to free agency as a goalie, that says something about you. And, you know, you could talk about the idea, the island of misfit toys when it comes to Moneyball, the idea, well, what's your deficiency? If you're here, there's got to be something wrong with you. And a lot of the time when we're talking about these backup goalies getting to market and having the capacity to negotiate, a lot of the times when those guys get there, they are doing that in the mindset that I want to be a starter. And because if I'm a starter, I can earn more money. Or I want to be a luxury backup. You know, what Jonathan Quick did with the Rangers, where he took less money on a kind of a prove-it situation to go to a good team close to home and try and effectively prove he was still an NHL caliber goalie. And he was really good in 2023, 2024. And there is no, especially when it comes to goaltending, there is no one size fits all. It is incredibly challenging. Frankly, it is the hardest position, in my opinion, in all of sports to evaluate. So while the Oilers seem like they are not making any progress because of their unwillingness to change, I think you also need to understand that this is the hardest position to get right. And that once teams get a guy that they feel good about, they are going to do everything in their power to not let them go. You think about the Predators right now, who traded away Vladislav Askarov, who is a really good young player, who they didn't want to wait. They didn't want to give Askarov, 2 or 3 seasons to see if he was good enough to be an NHL starter. They turned him into assets and said, no, we have UC Saros. We're going to sign him long-term. We're going to get Stamkos, Marchessault, Brady Shea. We're going to augment Forsberg and Yossi, and we're going to keep competing right now because we don't want to give a young goalie an opportunity. I think there are multiple ways to go about this. You look at what Buffalo did, where effectively they threw Devin Levy to the Wolves coming off of college hockey, and it was too many games. His body broke down. He got hurt. Ukko Pekka-Luukkonen bailed them out. Pekka-Luukkonen is somebody I am interested in. Hell, I'm interested in Levy as well for the Oilers because they just need someone to break through. And look, it's not going to surprise you, the 2 names that are coming up in our second and third segments, who we're picking for our all Oilers team for our goalies during the McDavid era. But we do need to talk about it from the aggregate, the big picture, that this is the hardest position to get right. And you can get by in the regular season with pretty average goaltending, as the last 2 years have demonstrated. Coming up next on today's edition of Locked On Oilers, we'll talk about who's the netminder, the starter on Team McDavid. Have you ever decided last minute to head to a game with friends or family? Maybe it's game day and suddenly you just got that itch to be at the show. And that's exactly where Game Time comes in. It is the easiest way to grab last minute tickets without the stress. With the money you save on tickets, you can splurge on food, drinks, merch, or even invite more people to go to the game with you. Game Time makes it happen. Game Time makes buying tickets fast and simple. Prices on the app drop the closer you get to first pitch, and they've got incredible last minute deals, clear seat views, and a lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying. Even though the Mets are pretty much dead to the world, 5.5 back of the Phillies, I do plan on getting to a game later this week, hopefully this weekend, and Game Time makes it happen. The official ticketing partner of Locked On MLB. So if you're tired of endlessly scrolling, trying to find the best deal, Game Time Zone Deals pick the best seat in your section for you. The best feature of the panoramic seat view. My personal favorite part of the Game Time ticket experience is the panoramic seat view, so you can see the view from your seat in the app before you buy, before you get to the game. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Oilers, making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day as we here on Locked On Oilers finish up our All McDavid team series. And this is a very fun project. I really can't begin to emphasize how much just information is out there about every single player in the NHL now. And if you want to become a hobbyist, or if you want to fashion yourself an expert, that's doable with free resources. So as we open up our conversation here and in talking about specifics of who's going to be in net for our All McDavid team, it's not a surprise. You know who the starting goalie is. It's Cam Talbot. Now, you're going to ask which iteration of Cam Talbot. It is 2016-2017 Cam Talbot. What's crazy about that season? Cam Talbot started 73 games that year for the Edmonton Oilers. 73. More likely than not, we will never see an NHL goalie start 70 games in a season again. With what we know about workloads, what we know about diminishing returns, frankly, a team needing to make the playoffs and win in the playoffs, you are entirely incentivized to have a quality backup so that your starting goalie is fresher in the postseason. I think Cam Talbot's numbers are crazy in the context of what they were. In his first two NHL seasons, he played 57 total games for the New York Rangers. In his first season as an Oiler, he started 56. You effectively year over year doubled his workload. And then you threw on another 20 games. You got 18, but you got him up to 73. In a 2-year window, he went from starting less than 30 to 73 games. And look, the Oilers were a team trying to make a leap. They were trying to go from nice ascending group, McDavid, Draisaitl, Nugent-Hopkins, those young pieces they had drafted over the years, trying to get them into that next phase. And look, I think some of that was self-inflicted errors, for self-inflicted wounds, and that they were so desperate in trying to just be competent that they overcompensated. They did things like sign Milan Lucic. They did things like overworking Cam Talbot. And look, Cam Talbot was very good for them that year. Make no mistake about it. Cam Talbot was genuinely a fringe Vezina Trophy candidate that season. 42, 22, and 8, a 919 save percentage, 2.39 goals against, and 31 goals saved above expected, which was the second best number in the entire NHL. And look, when a player is playing really well, they're responding well to their increased workload. If you're a coach, you're not de-incentivized to play that guy. If anything, you feel, okay, I need to keep riding the hot hand. This guy is doing something he has never done before. We do it until the wheels come off. And ultimately, that's what happened. In 2 short years, Cam Talbot got traded out of Edmonton after starting 73 games, after getting the Oilers their first playoff series win in more than 10 years. Cam Talbot hit a physical wall. And Cam Talbot's had a pretty solid NHL career, all things considered. For somebody who was undrafted to have hung around as long as he has, and to frankly just, I don't want to be callous, but like made the money he has in an NHL career that's been relatively solid. You know, a couple of really nice seasons, but he's 37 years old now, and he signed another contract to hang around. But he was in Detroit last year, pretty mediocre numbers. LA the year before as a tandem goalie, more of a starter in a tandem. But for the career he's carved out, where he went from a 26-year-old undrafted free agent with the Rangers in 2013, 2014, where he backed up Henrik Lundqvist after they had sent down Marty Biron after they lost 9-3 to the Sharks in October of that season. He's carved out a really solid career. He's been to the playoffs a couple times. He has that playoff series win with the Oilers. He's about the best you're going to do in the free agent market when it comes to goalies. He is probably, at least as far as archetype goes, the best you're going to do, where he's probably overqualified to be a backup, but he's not good enough to be a 70-30 starter. You know, he's more of a 60-40 starter. He can give you 40 to 50 starts, but ideally you want that number to be pretty close to a 50-50 split to maximize his value. And I don't think it's a coincidence that he really struggled after that massive increase in workload, just because of the nature of the goalie tending position. We talked about this quite a bit in regards to Jack Campbell on last week's show, where we were talking about that Campbell free agent signing and Darnell Nurse extension. Jack Campbell made a massive leap in his workload as a Leaf before getting to unrestricted free agency. That's what I was talking about as far as a team recognizing someone has never done something before and riding it until the wheels fall off. And look, I don't think of it as like a conscious, the team knows this guy is deficient and they're going to play him till he gets hurt. I think teams and players too, frankly, are incentivized to try and ride things until the wheels come off because of the nature of the sport and because of the nature of these teams and these markets, where if Cam Talbot started 73 regular season games and the Oilers won the Stanley Cup and then he was out of the league 2 years later, every Oilers fan would have signed up for that. You look at Toronto, the way they've handled the goaltending position, where they've rotated through a bunch of guys. You go from James Reimer to Freddie Anderson. You talk about Stolars and Wall and all of the various guys that have bounced through there. And the way they've handled that position is a baseline. Okay, if we have X amount of competency and we play well enough in front of them, that's good enough for us. That is all we need to do. And it really creates a difficult value assessment for these coaches and for these players. That 2016-17 Oilers team was the best Oilers team in quite a while. It was the first real team that was competitive with McDavid and Draisaitl on it, who were ascending young players who looked to be the foundation of a strong core. And the Oilers did not want to delay that. They did not want to give any ambiguity about their intentions of being a contender. And Cam Talbot played a ton of hockey in a short period of time. And I really do think there's a strong correlation there between Talbot hitting a physical wall from such a massive increase in workload and what happened over the course of the rest of his career. And look, Talbot's had a really good NHL career, especially when you put in the context of his journey, non-Division I college hockey team. You put him in the minors. He's effectively a plug-in for Marty Biron, who retired after the season started rather than go to the AHL. Cam Talbot wasn't supposed to get this life. Cam Talbot wasn't supposed to end up a 37-year-old journeyman goalie, but he's carved out a really nice NHL career. And there's always going to be a natural part of my curiosity that wonders, well, if the Oilers had managed him a little better, I'm not saying he would have been the Oilers starter for 10 years, but he could have lasted longer than 4. They probably could have gotten one more good contract out of him before letting him move on. And maybe you don't walk into that Jack Campbell signing, and then maybe you don't end up with our backup goalie, Stuart Skinner. Coming up next on today's edition of Locked On Oilers, we break down why Stuart Skinner's rookie season really is the second best Oilers goalie season of the Connor McDavid era, and a whole lot more. So be sure to stick around to this edition of Locked On Oilers. We've got your team covered every day. August 26th is officially FanDuel Futures Day, a brand new holiday for football fans who live bold predictions and preseason hunches. For just 24 hours, FanDuel is giving you deals on season predictions. So whether you're calling MVP, eyeing a long shot division winner, or you're ready to crown your Super Bowl champ before week 1 kicks off, this is your moment. So if you want the chalk answer, you probably bet Joe Burrow or Lamar Jackson for MVP. My dart throw, CJ Stroud. I do think the Texans have a strong bounce back candidacy for him to drive the narrative that gets him the MVP. If I had to pick a Super Bowl champ right now, I still think the Eagles are probably the best team in the league. I think the NFC, being as weak as it is, makes the path for them a lot easier to forecast than it would be for Kansas City, for Buffalo, for Baltimore, or a number of other AFC teams, which all are on varying degrees pretty good. If you're ready for FanDuel Futures Day, you need to download that app and start planning now, because Futures Day is one day and one day only. FanDuel, play your game. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Oilers, where we are concluding the Connor McDavid era fantasy team assembly. And real quick, I didn't say it earlier in the show, but the criteria were $71.5 million cap, 1 entry-level contract, which we used on Connor McDavid, And the cap hit for each player is based on the year you select. So you heard me say the 2016-17 version of Cam Talbot, which brings us to 2022-2023 Stuart Skinner as the backup goalie for this team. And this might surprise you, but rookie Stuart Skinner was pretty good. 29, 14, and 5, 913 save, 2.75 goals against is a little high, but he was 11th in goals saved above expected with 18.4. And that's enough. You know, when you have a good enough team in front of you, there is enough from those guys to make it work. And I think, and I've said this, I've had this opinion for a while now, every day has definitely heard me say this. I think Stuart Skinner kind of was a victim of his own success in that he was good enough that first season to push his development, or frankly, push his role in the organization along probably a little faster than he was ready to. You think about the workload jumps from minor hockey up to the NHL. You think about the quality of competition difference where he was versus where he ends up. And that's the challenge here. Because goalie is so challenging to evaluate, you are so inclined to just believe what you're seeing that you start to lose the context a little bit. But for said context, that rookie season, Stuart Skinner gets into 50 games. The year before, he plays 48. Math is hard, sorry. The year before that, he plays 32. The year before that, he plays 44. The year before that, he plays 47. So he has made a gradual and frankly, a reasonable jump, 38, 40 to 50 starts. That's not a crazy leap. That's not going all the way up to where Cam Talbot was with 70 in a given season. But I do think the Oilers, by virtue of having a pretty good team in front of him, put Skinner in a position where he probably wasn't ready to be a bell cow starter. That was one of my bold predictions on before last season, 24-25. I thought Skinner was going to establish himself. I thought Stuart Skinner was going to take the leap and be competent. And look, the Oilers don't need a great goalie. Would a great goalie help? If you just dropped Igor Shesterkin or Andrei Vasilevsky onto this team, would that help? Absolutely. But I think the Oilers don't need that caliber of goalie. I think if recent NHL history has shown you anything, I think you can get by with just a slightly above average goalie. I think the cutoff point is somewhere in that mid-teen mark. Like if you were to lay all the goalies out in a power rankings, I think if you have the 16th best goalie in the NHL and you have a really good team around them, I think you can win the Stanley Cup. I think Darcy Kemper is reasonable enough proof. I think Jordan Binnington is reasonable enough proof. I think Aiden Hill is reasonable enough proof. Then around them, Vasilevsky's won Vezinas, Bob's won Vezinas, Holtby has a Vezina, Corey Crawford, not a Vezina goalie, but very good. Marc-Andre Fleury, really nice career. Jonathan Quick, probably a Hall of Famer. I almost said Matt Martin instead of Tim Thomas. Alliteration got me confused there, but really good goalies flash. And that's really the key here. The Oilers are not asking Stuart Skinner to win them series by himself. They're not putting him in the situation Connor Hellebuck or Igor Shesterkin is in, where they are the best player on their team. And for their team to win, they need to play like the best player. The Oilers are simply asking Stuart Skinner, do not lose us the game. And in the regular season, against the average NHL opponent, he can do that. In the playoffs, against a team who can start to build habits and patterns and recognize them, who can start to dissect you a little bit more schematically because you have prolonged exposure against one team and you're a bit more in tune with their strategy and their tactics, it becomes more challenging. I think Skinner definitely becomes a victim of his own head. He definitely gets in his own head and starts to wear on him. I still can vividly picture it. The regular season game between the Oilers and Panthers up in Alberta, where Reinhart banked that shot in off the back of his head. And if I close my eyes right now, I can still picture the way Skinner just immediately sulked his shoulders and dropped his head. He knew he messed up. He knew he needed to have that one. I go back to the goal in the Cup final where he made the save, didn't react at all to the rebounds because he headbutted it, and he just stood there. And the Panthers cashed in the rebound, and that sealed the game. This is a very fragile player. The Oilers are way too conscientious of that. And look, I get it. It is easy for me as a podcaster to tell Chris Knobloch, hey, you got to do something here. This guy's not good enough. Chris Knoblauch doesn't have other options. He doesn't have another goalie to go to beyond Calvin Pickard, who Pickard once or twice, you can break out the bells and whistles, the novelty of the backup goalie makes the team in front of them play better. That is true. But at the same time, I think it's really important to understand that we can have this perspective. We all know the Oilers need a better goalie, a more consistent goalie, a more dependable goalie, but it is really challenging to acquire one. And Skinner has enough of a sample size that the Oilers can delude themselves or talk themselves into him recapturing that form like that. Like, oh, all he needs is to get his confidence right and he'll be consistently good. And that's a driving force in his outcomes. I just don't think that's a feasible path here. And then really quick, before we get out of here, I said it before, the threshold for winning the Stanley Cup isn't insane as a goalie. The team around you needs to be really good. Don't get me wrong. That Vegas team that won the Stanley Cup, they outscored opponents 66-33 at 5-on-5 when Vegas won the Cup with Adin Hill. That is dominance. Darcy Kuemper faced less expected goals against in the entirety of that Stanley Cup final run the Avalanche won the Cup in than Igor Shesterkin faced in the best of 7 series against the Devils that won 7 games in that season, 2022-23. There is a real challenge here. The Oilers need to get better. The options are extremely limited. And the Oilers' supposition and Stan Bowman's supposition is that the devil they know is better than the one they don't. It is easy for me to say they should roll the dice. It's better to gamble. It's better to try and find out than to stick with what you know. And if it were up to me, I would have tried to find a way. I would have tried to get John Gibson. I would have tried to go get one of the backup goalies who signed a free agent contract with whether it was Alex Lyon in Buffalo or maybe an Ilya Samsonov situation where somebody who's been a starter or at least a tandem goalie before trying to work their way up. I don't think Stuart Skinner is good enough for where the Oilers are going, but I do think rookie Stuart Skinner was good enough to be the backstop for the All Connor McDavid team. Thank you so much to everybody who listened to any of the All Connor McDavid team episodes. I want to thank everyone that made Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network where we've got your team covered every day. Subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, give the show a 5-star review. If you're watching over on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. If you list out your full team in the comments, I'll read it on a show later this week. Check out Locked On NHL and Locked On NHL Game Night, where they are breaking down all 32 teams ahead of the 2025-2026 NHL season. I will talk to you guys on Friday. Until then, let's go Oilers.